Welcome to the podcast of the Political Page blog with commentary from an attorney and entrepreneur on the political and social issues of the day, from a rationalist, libertarian, and often irreverent perspective. This is Political Page, and here's what's on my mind today. Hello, folks, and welcome to the podcast of the 7th of June, 2019. This one's entitled, The Russian Agent Was Ours, and the Mueller report unravels. Now, just when you think you can wash, rinse, repeat enough times to get the grime of the entire Russia smear campaign out of your hair, another splotch of filth lands smack dab in the middle, and it's back to the showers, folks. Now, in case you have been blessedly in a coma for the last couple of years, the Russia narrative has already segued pathetically from, what did it begin with, right? Trump is a secret Russian agent, the Manchurian candidate, to, some of his campaign officials met with U.S. spies that pretended to be Russians and got turned down, and in between we were treated to embarrassing allegations that a Trump lawyer met Russian agents in Prague until it turned out he'd never even been to Prague. And is there anything else? No, there wasn't. In short, after 36 million taxpayer dollars and 2 years of rabidity in the press and turmoil in Washington, D.C., it all turned out to be a great big never mind. And that's where the hero of the Republic, that paragon of neutral virtue, Robert Mueller, together with his band of merry Democrat donors, had to leave the Russia investigation. No collusion, no American involved. Boy, that must be humiliating for this guy. And in fact, it was, because you know what he did? He pulled a Comey, right? He goes out there and he gives this little speech. It's ostensibly his retirement speech, his I'm going to talk, but you can't ask me any questions, recasting of his own findings as simply not having enough evidence of collusion. But what he seems to forget is that we can read, or at least some of us still can, and in his report itself, there is zero evidence of any collusion in the whole interminable droning thing. As an aside, he apparently also forgot that in America, unlike Stalinist Russia, there's no such standard as needing to be exonerated by a prosecutor. We have innocence until proven guilty, and not proven guilty until exonerated. But anyway, that's a subject for a whole nother blog and possibly even an entire course on the history of totalitarian thuggery. But wait. The report does have one titillating little nugget in there, and believe me, the usual sources in the leftist media have grabbed onto this sucker just like Robert Mueller did. That nugget is the basis for the entire second half of his report, that this implication that somehow, for some reason, Trump was going to obstruct the investigation of the fact that he did not do anything wrong. This tidbit appears in the introduction to the lengthy report, and that's what's interesting about it. You only put things in the introduction that you want people to have in their heads, foreshadowing basically, to have in their heads and wait for when it comes in the body of the report. And he does indeed emphasize this here and there throughout the report. It is the only modicum of any connection whatsoever between anyone in the Trump campaign and any Russian agent, so it has this outsized importance. And here it is. Ready? Paul Manafort, he of the 3-month tenure as the chairman of the Trump campaign, had contacts in Trump Tower. Trump Tower even. Really, this is sounding very nefarious, isn't it? In 2016, the year of the election, with a Russian agent named Konstantin Kilimnik. Now, one could reasonably posit that this little tidbit was probably also used in that first spy warrant by an American administration against a domestic political opponent, the Trump campaign, a fact which I dearly hope will emerge from the newly declassified documents that the Attorney General is now looking at to see what he can release. One would almost hope that it was used. You know why? Because absent that little gem of suspicion, we would have to conclude that the secretive anti-terrorism FISA court issues domestic spy warrants on political opponents based on nothing more than the word of an overtly biased FBI bureaucrat that they don't like the haircut of the candidate. So, back to Kilimnik. Now, the reason that Mr. Kilimnik becomes important is that the Mueller report has nothing in it, right? Nada, zero, zip, zilch of any wrongdoing by anybody, but it doubled its own size with this long, meandering screed of implication that Trump obstructed justice to stop Mueller from finding out what? That nobody did anything wrong? There's nothing there. Maybe it was to hide Mr. Kilimnik, right? Because the problem for the embittered Mr. Mueller is this. It's very difficult to convince people that a subject would obstruct an investigation that the subject knew was going to exonerate him of all wrongdoing. Why would you obstruct the ultimate proof of your innocence? If Trump didn't collude and his campaign didn't collude, an investigation would demonstrate that, so why obstruct it? Clearly, there has to be something else out there besides nobody talked to any Russians, something Trump wanted to protect by thinking about firing Mueller but not firing him, which apparently was the obstruction. Enter Mr. Kilimnik and the hapless Paul Manafort. Now, as an aside, Paul Manafort is basically being sent to Rikers, and he's been in solitary confinement for, months. And he's probably going to spend the rest of his life there. You know why? Because he fudged his income on a mortgage application a decade ago. Even Alexandra Occasional-Cortex is upset by this one. I guess she must have a mortgage, too. But in any event, meeting with a Russian agent at Trump Tower during the election year, that sounds really nefarious. And that's the reason, obviously, because there sure as hell isn't anything else, that Nancy Pelosi thinks Trump is involved in a cover-up. And it's why Nadler the Hutt says that there's definite evidence of obstruction. There is something there. Except, you know what? There are still some journalists in the world, and one of the journalists is named John Solomon, and he has dug up something that, the word bombshell has been so overused throughout this thing that I hate to use it, but I'm going to anyway. It's a freaking bombshell. And it's a bombshell because, as it turns out, Mr. Kilimnik did not meet Paul Manafort as his first American contact. No, he was really used to meeting with Americans, and do you know why? Because he's not a Russian agent at all. He's an agent working for us. He's a U.S. agent for the State Department. He was a sensitive intelligence asset on our side, at least going back in the documentation until 2012, and probably for a substantial period of time before that. He was our very best asset in the Ukraine. By the way, he's not a Russian, he's Ukrainian. Into what was going on with the inner circle of the Ukrainian pro-Russia strongman party. So sensitive was his work in this area that he reported directly to the head of the political office of our Ukrainian embassy. It's extremely unusual, apparently, to have that kind of access. He met with them at least once a week, often several times a week, at our embassy to provide them critical intelligence on what was going on with the pro-Russia groups in the Ukraine. And in a couple of occasions, they flew him to Washington, D.C. to directly brief higher-ups on particularly critical intelligence. I will bet you one of those times was August 2016 when he actually ended up running into Manafort. He was our spy, people. Ours, not a Russian asset. Now, you might be tempted to kind of forgive Mueller here and say, well, the guy was a pretty good secret agent. Maybe Mueller actually thought that he was a Russian agent as he was investigating all of this, huh? But you would be kinder than I in that respect, because that's BS. Mueller had documentary confirmation of this in his files all along. He had transcripts of interviews with Kilimnik by the FBI explaining it all. He had DOJ documents. He had State Department documents. He had all of it during the investigation. He had all of it when he drafted his report. He had all of it when he stood up in front of the country and implied that the President of the United States obstructed justice because of this. And in his report, Mr. Mueller made a very, very big deal about the discussions between Mr. Kilimnik and Paul Manafort in August 2016. He made a big deal out of the allegation that this man had Russian intelligence contacts. Well, duh, you wouldn't be a very useful agent if you didn't have any contacts with the other side, would you? What Mr. Mueller did not mention is everything else he knew about Mr. Kilimnik and why he kept those Russian intelligence contacts open so he could spy on them for us. That he worked for us, not for the Russians, for nearly a decade. That he met with high Obama embassy and State Department officials many times. That he told Manafort openly only what he had long before told our government. That changes the entire complexion of who and what Mr. Kilimnik is to us, to Manafort, and ultimately, assuming Trump ever even heard of the man, to the Trump campaign. By not disclosing any of this, Mueller intentionally misled the Department of Justice, the Congress, and the people of the United States into thinking that Paul Manafort and the Trump campaign had nefarious contacts with a Russian agent, instead of a glancing contact with a sensitive American agent who worked for the Obama State Department. That is a very, very different something's there, is it not? Mueller hid this from his report. He had to have done so intentionally. He did so for no other reason than to create a misleading implication that there was some modicum of Russian collusion that he simply couldn't prove beyond a reasonable doubt, when in reality it was a fact that exonerated the Trump campaign of any wrongdoing. Hiding a fact that is absolutely imperative to understanding the facts that he's alleging, hiding that fact that would completely turn the collusion and obstruction narrative totally on its head is not an accident. It is an egregious omission of fact that is in effect nothing more than an intentional lie. And what else is Mueller lying about? Thank you for tuning in to the Political Page podcast today. Original blog articles, complete with a lot more information and great links to original source material, can be found anytime on politicalpage.net. That's political, P-A-I-G-E.net.